In early September of this year, Insightrix Research ran a poll among Saskatchewan residents using the Sasquatch Research online panel to get a look at the charitable activities within the province. We run these polls every year and track the results year to year. This year, we saw a drop in the amount of money people were able to donate to charities around the province. When, in 2015, 95% of Saskatchewan residents reported donating to charities, now, in 2017, that number has fallen to 92%. While a 3% drop in the number of people who report making donations to charities may not seem like a whole lot in the grand scheme of things, it's actually very much the opposite. Non-profit and not-for-profit enterprises in Canada rely on charitable donations to help the people that really need it, and often operate on razor-thin budgets. For some charities and non-profits, a 3% drop could make the difference in being able to keep the lights on or not. That's not to say it's all doom and gloom. The same Insightrix poll showed volunteer activity between 2015 and 2017 stayed steady. While there may not be as much money being made in donations, the people of Saskatchewan are still getting out to volunteer and help out their communities. Hello, and welcome to Stories of Market Research, the Insightrix podcast. My name is Duncan McGregor, Marketing and Communications Coordinator at Insightrix Research in Saskatoon, Canada, as well as your podcast host. Today we're talking about the ways the people and businesses in the field of market research give back. Market research, marketing, and the firms that do it sometimes get a bad rap. Talk to a friend who's not in the biz and you may learn their opinion can range between it being a really boring field to an evil empire, similar to Darth Vader's close group of friends. Actually, the truth can sometimes be very far from that impression. In some instances, market researchers and data scientists of all kinds are leading the charge in the effort to help non-profits and not-for-profits in Canada, and globally. In business, they say you have to spend money to make money. For charitable organizations, who rarely have the resources to do so, this could be quite a problem. Non-profits and not-for-profits have the same needs as any other firm. They require studies on employee engagement, sector profiling, data cleaning and interpretation, website and dashboard construction, and a ton of other requirements that need doing, and many of these organizations don't have the resources to do them. In the last few years, data scientists have risen to the challenge that this situation presents, and are organizing to help take on this problem. Insightrix itself often volunteers and offers steeply discounted services to nonprofits and not-for-profits in our community. Across Canada, groups of data scientists are getting together and volunteering their time as well, their energy and their expertise, to assisting these organizations. Data for Good is a Canadian organization getting involved in this global movement. Formed in 2013, Data for Good organizes market researchers and data scientists from all kinds of fields to lend themselves to helping out non-profits and not-for-profits here in Canada. Today, we're lucky to talk to not one, but three of the folks who make up Data for Good. We'll be talking to Geoff Zakaib, founder of the Calgary chapter of Data for Good, and Kevin Hayes, who just got a chapter rolling down in Regina. But first, we'll be talking with Joy Robson, co-founder of Data for Good. She joins us from Toronto to explain just how Data for Good got started and what led her to form the organization. Datathons, meetups, social justice, and using your superpowers for good. All that and more on this episode of Stories of Market Research, the Insightrix podcast. Here with the founder of Data for Good, Joy Robson. Do you mind if we just get into it, Joy?
Sure.
Excellent. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your background, just to start?
Sure. My background is that I am a data scientist by trade. I guess that term is now something people understand. When I started working in this space, it wasn't as known of a term, but it's great to have the shorthand now because people kind of understand what I've been doing for 20 years in my career. So, yeah, it's good. I mean, of course, now everything's about machine learning and artificial intelligence, and just like everything in technology, you have to stay up to date because it's always changing.
So you're one of the co-founders of Data for Good, correct?
Yes, correct. In Canada. I co-founded, yes, in Canada. It's a global movement. I don't know if you've noticed, but it is. We're just we're the Canadian part of something that's going on globally. And so, yes, I was inspired personally back in October 2012 by DataKind out of the U.S. and then went ahead and said, let's build this in Canada with DataKind's encouragement, and went and found people who were like-minded and had the skill set and the passion to do this in Canada. So, of course, my co-founder, Victor Anjos here in Toronto, and then Geoff Zakaib out of Calgary, and of course now we've got over 3,000 volunteers, so I can't know everybody's name anymore.
Were you involved with DataKind at the time?
Well, they were very small. When I first read about them in The Economist, they had just launched themselves as Data with Engineers Without Borders, and so they had launched out of Brooklyn, New York, and they were starting out, and I contacted them because I'd heard about them, and I said, well, Canada's got great people, and we want to be involved in this, and they said, well, we're not ready to go outside of Brooklyn right now. Okay. And of course, fast forward, they've gone way outside of Brooklyn, and they're doing fantastic, and we're still great buddies with them. Okay. But what's happened is all the Canadians I've connected with have been telling me that they're happy to do a Canadian thing, and so Data for Good Canada is through and through a Canadian thing. And I said, well, why don't we join the global network? And they said, well, we're part of the Data for Good global movement. And it seems like the Canadians are happy with that. So I got to listen to the people.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, I was looking at your website today, and I was reading that, this is a quote, "We participate at the intersection of data science and social justice, computer coding and philanthropy, data-informed insights and real-world impact." Does that just sum up your mission pretty well?
It's bold. I mean, people add their own words to it. I love what people have to say. I mean, DataKind's slogan is "Data in the service of humanity." Right. When I first read that in 2012, I just thought it just sounded noble. So I liked it. Victor and I started saying that we're the Canadian voice for data scientists with a conscience, and we suggested that if people want to stay at the forefront of technological innovation and positive social change, that they should join us. Because as we launched ourselves, that's how we felt we were going to build this. And we've attempted to stay at the crossroads of positive social change and technological innovation.
Right on. Well, you were founded in 2013, correct? How many chapters have you gotten together so far across Canada?
Yeah, so the inspiration was October 2012. I found Victor in 2013, and then in 2014, with Geoff on board, we incorporated as a Canadian federal not-for-profit. We're officially 3 years old as a going concern, a Canadian not-for-profit. It's amazing because we started with Toronto, and I'm from Vancouver, and Victor's from Montreal, so we thought, well, naturally, we've still got contacts back in those cities. We should be able to launch those cities, and Jake Porway from DataKind had given a TED Talk in Montreal, so we thought there's definitely an appetite in these places, so we set about building those cities, and then, of course, you think that's where you're going to grow, but then you hear from people in other places, and now we've got chapters in Edmonton and Ottawa and Saskatchewan. Like, it's just people. What we've realized is it's not about where the biggest cities are. It's about where passionate and bright people are. And when those people reach out to us and they want to build, we partner with them. Now we've got Toronto, we've got Calgary, Ottawa, Montreal, Vancouver, Edmonton, and Regina, with rumblings in Halifax starting. So it truly is, and it was always meant to be, a Canada-wide effort.
Now, you were just talking about all the people who are so excited to be involved. What kind of people do you recruit?
Yeah. We started out trying to attract based on word of mouth and referrals and like-minded people, birds of the feather sort. So that's how we built ourselves, was just having friends invite friends and colleagues invite colleagues and come to our meetup events and reach out to us and connect with us through social media and such. And that has worked pretty well because some of these professional communities are close-knit and they go to the same conferences and they've graduated from the same programs and they tend to stay in touch. So that's worked pretty well for recruiting the skill set that we've needed to date. Of course, we're open to other people being involved. The events that we host, the Datathon events that we host, you would be hard-pressed to want to spend a whole weekend with us if you weren't skilled in data techniques of some kind. We don't prescribe what your skill set has to be, but to spend a whole weekend working through data, you have to be passionate about it. You have to love it. Only certain people come out for that kind of weekend event. But our evening meetups are more of a cross-section, more informative, more knowledge sharing, and so we get a broader circle of people coming out to the evening events. And anyone's still welcome to come to the Datathons. And especially if you're just learning, if you're just getting into the space of building up your data skills, come out. It's a great learning opportunity.
Well, these Datathons, I'm really curious about them. Could you explain how these Datathons work?
So what we do is we organize them for the people. We try and feed everybody and find a cool, interesting place to host the event so that they're in a central location with great Wi-Fi and a lot of desk space, and so we'll feed them breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, and you got to keep your volunteers happy, right?
Exactly.
We'll do breakout sessions that can be informative on some emerging technology, and we definitely spend time with the not-for-profit and NGO that we're working with, whether it's 1, 2, or 3. I don't think we've ever done more than 3 in one Datathon event.
Okay.
But they present at the beginning to share their mission, tell everybody in the room why what they do matters and why they care about it, and then they pose 3 questions, because it's only a weekend. We're not trying to solve all the world's problems in 24 hours. No one's that naive. So they pose 3 questions that we've worked with them to help formulate based on the data that we think we'll be able to find and pull together. And then everybody gets to work trying to answer those 3 questions. And the way they answer them is completely unique to where they're coming from. Some people might build an algorithm. Some people might do a data visualization. Some people might only get through an exploratory phase where they give counts of what the data contains. All of it tends to be useful to the not-for-profit because they've never done it before, or they've done it but not to the level of sophistication that our event provides. So it's definitely a journey. Becoming a data-informed decision-making organization is a journey. Where you start and where we can take you on a weekend is completely unique to each organization.
Well, that sounds amazing. Speaking of organizations, how do you pick your organizations that you like to work with?
Well, the best is when they come to us via our volunteers. Some of these people are already passionate about certain social issues, and they bring those issues and those organizations to our attention. That's the best. It's also good when the organizations apply to us and answer some sort of pre-screening questions, and then we try and get to work together. And as a last resort, we go tracking them down and say, do you know about what data can do for you? And like I say, that's a last resort. 6 years ago, that was what you had to do. Thankfully, awareness goes up every quarter, and it's not such a big explanation and a background story anymore. Most organizations understand the power of data for good or for evil, and there's not such a long explanation anymore to get to starting to work together.
Well, that's excellent. Now, can you give us an idea of the types of work that you've undertaken in Canada? Like, do you have any specific projects that Data for Good's been involved in that you've been particularly proud of?
Well, I'll always have a soft spot for Toronto's first 2 partners, Second Harvest Toronto and the Sentinel Project. Victor and I talked about how we want to think globally but act locally, and those 2 represent that well, because Second Harvest Toronto, of course, is local to this city, and they work on food rescue so that food's not being wasted. You have to check them out. They're just so inspirational what they do. And then globally, the Sentinel Project, when we met them, they were so on the cutting edge. It was 2013. They were scraping data off of Twitter and building a database to identify hate speech as an early warning sign to predict atrocities and genocide. And we thought, and they're in Toronto? I mean, we would expect them to be in Geneva or New York working for the, UNICEF or something like of that caliber. But here they were in Toronto, just building this as a Canadian not-for-profit, and we partnered with them. We were fascinated with what they were up to. So those 2 will always stand out for me. I'm also really impressed with the work that Calgary's done with the Distress Center, because if you think about how important Alberta, Calgary, Edmonton, Fort McMurray, and the entire province's economy is to the rest of Canada. Everyone, we are a confederation of strength and strength. Each province brings so much. But during our tenure, Calgary and Edmonton and Alberta, they had some economic challenging years, and it was great to see the Calgary chapter step up in a way that was socially supportive to their population. So again, I'll always have a soft spot for what they did during those economically challenging and changing years in the Alberta economy.
Wow. So how can people get involved? If you're interested in volunteering or sponsorship, how do you get involved?
Well, we love hearing from people that want to sponsor. We get in-kind donations of space, food, drink. If it's a corporation and they want to do some sort of cross-promotion work, hand out T-shirts, things like that, we can certainly talk about sponsoring one-off events and things like that. So it's really just reaching out to us. The chapter leads in each of the cities, and then of course Victor and I, as the co-founders, are the right people to connect with, and we just go from there, because I would call us an adolescent in the not-for-profit space. Mm-hmm. We're certainly not newborns or toddlers anymore, but we're by no means a fully established, grown-up not-for-profit. So we're really open to new ideas still.
Well, we'll make sure to put all the contact information in our podcast webpage, so if anybody's interested, they can get a hold of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So, wrapping up, what would you say your long-term vision is of your initiative, of Data for Good?
Well, being blue sky people, we, from the get-go, even when it was just the two of us, Victor and I knew that Canada could build something great. And I think our vision has been reinforced by the great people who've joined us. So it would be nice to get Data for Good really functioning and productive in every city that feels like they can make a difference in their local communities, and to have it be a healthy not-for-profit in Canada. Maybe one day it'll grow up and become a charity as well, but for now, we're quite happy being a not-for-profit and functioning at that level. And it would be nice to really circle back and make sure that Canada is still on the global conversation in this movement. Oh, wow. Okay, awesome. So is there any upcoming events or information you'd like our listeners to be aware of? Always. Yeah, check your local chapters. The frequency of meeting is unique to each city, but I would highlight that in Vancouver in January 2018, they're hosting their first Datathon event ever, and it's with the Overdose Prevention Society in Vancouver to help them work on the opioid crisis. So it's, these are heavy topics, but people that really believe we can fight back on some of these challenges.
No, it's definitely a worthy cause. We'll make sure that like I said, the contact information for Data for Good, especially Vancouver chapter, is included on our webpage, so people can get a hold of you guys about that.
Amazing. Thank you.
All right. Well, this has been a real pleasure talking to you today, Joy. I'm really glad to talk to you about Data for Good and its initiatives. It seems like you guys are doing really good work, and we're really looking forward to getting involved ourselves.
Thanks, Duncan.
No, anytime. You have a great day. As Joy says, Data for Good is working hard to make Canada a player in this global movement. And so far, the movement is spreading to concerned data scientists all across Canada. Our next guest is Geoff Zakaib, a national board member with Data for Good and the founder of their Calgary chapter. Geoff joins us by phone from his offices in Calgary to discuss a recent Datathon event held by the Calgary chapter, as well as what led him to get involved in volunteering with Data for Good. We're here with Geoff Zakaib from Data for Good from the Calgary chapter. How are you doing today, Geoff?
Doing really well, thank you.
Awesome. So could you tell them about yourself and your background?
Yeah. So I have an engineering background, and I've worked in the oil and gas industry for many years in the past, and then got into the area of data and information management consulting. And currently I'm doing a lot of volunteer work in the area of nonprofit and social enterprises.
Oh, right on. So how did you get involved with Data for Good?
Well, it was about 4 years ago. So I came across an organization in the U.S. called DataKind.
Okay, yeah.
And they have a great website, datakind, KIND.org. And they've been pursuing this idea of data and data scientists, data analysts, those that have a passion for data to use those skills in the nonprofit social sector. And when I came across them, it would really kind of to the areas that I'm really passionate about. Number one, the technology around data and information information and how that's evolving. But importantly, I do a lot of volunteer work here in Calgary in the areas of homelessness and poverty reduction and those sorts of things. So I really saw the need for this type of volunteer organization. And I said, well, we got to do this in Calgary. So I actually reached out to them in the U.S. and said, I want to start a chapter here in Calgary. And they said, well, you know what? We just heard a little while back from two folks in Toronto, Victor and Joy, and they're getting started in Toronto with an organization. And so that was Data for Good. And so since then, I kind of teamed up with them, and we've launched the Calgary chapter about 4 years ago, and I'm on the board of the National Data for Good organization, so we're spreading the idea across Canada.
So the history of the chapter has been about 4 years now?
Yeah, and so we've, we organize ourselves currently through Meetup.com and the various city chapters, and so we've grown in Calgary to over 900 members.
Wow.
Which is just amazing.
Yeah.
So it really shows, that there really is a desire, within the tech community, those that have those skills, they find out that they can use those data skills for social good. They really get excited about that, and we've had a amazing response across Canada, actually.
Well, any chance to use your superpowers for good, right?
That's right.
So what type of projects have you been involved with in Calgary?
Well, quite a few over the last 4 years. I guess I would just maybe take one step back and just say that we organize ourselves in sort of three different ways in terms of what we're doing with the Calgary chapter. So the first is we kind of have about sort of monthly-ish meetups and bringing together the community, and we will tend to have a kind of a guest speaker or somebody who will present, on tools and technology or a topic that's top of mind in this area. So
they're kind of like an educational event.
Yeah. So, for example, we just had one on data ethics. So we had just an amazing panel discussion talking about data ethics, right? And so data for good, but also data for bad, right? And how to use data appropriately and avoid some of the pitfalls. And so that kind of thing was just fascinating. We've had data scientists in from Alberta Health Services that have a group going there, and that's the way we build community. But also as part of those meetups, we will often bring in a not-for-profit social organization, kind of smaller ones that may have some issues related to data, and so we'll bring them in. They'll describe kind of the great work that they're doing in the community. So we'll get 4 or 5 people, data ambassadors, to volunteer to help that organization with these smaller projects. It could take a couple weeks. It could take a couple months. And it could be building a dashboard for them or helping them integrate data across various databases. So number one is the meetups. Number two are these smaller projects. The use of data ambassadors, and then the third way is kind of our signature event, which is what we call datathons.
Datathons.
Yeah. So datathons are great, and we've done actually about 4 of those over the 4 years. So weekend events. So it's like a Friday night, all day Saturday and Sunday morning, where we partner with a larger nonprofit social organization that tends to have a lot of data, but they also tend to be fairly mature in their practices, because we really need to work with them to collect their data from multiple sources, help anonymize their data when required, and importantly come up with what we call objectives for the datathon. And those objectives, we turn those into teams at the datathon. And we've done those datathons recently with the Calgary Foundation and previously with the Women's Emergency Shelter, the Calgary Distress Center, and the Sustainable Alberta Association on their Commuter Challenge.
Well, you just finished that datathon, I believe, with the Calgary Foundation. Is that correct?
Yeah.
How did that go? Can you tell us more about the event?
just a couple weeks ago, and it was just amazing. It was our biggest by far in terms of the amount of data that we collected. So and Data for Good Calgary was partnered with the Calgary Foundation, which is a very large granting organization that's been around for 20 plus years and has done amazing work in philanthropy and engaging citizens and with millions of dollars over the last few years in terms of money that went to projects and organizations. But the neat thing was that we actually had a simultaneous datathon because Data for Good Edmonton was partnered with the Edmonton Community Foundation.
Wow.
So both groups were working simultaneously on the same weekend, and we had multiple data sets from both cities, but also across Alberta. So just to give you a sense of the sort of, I mentioned the objectives, and so each city kind of had 5 different teams working on these objectives. So in Calgary, Team 1 did a deep dive into the Calgary Foundation granting data over the last 10 years or so, and really did a deep dive and study into that. Team 2 broadened that out to look at more the Calgary landscape around nonprofit organizations. So we had the foundation granting data, but we also had 211 information and referral data, which is a call line that people call in when they need help and they get referred to an organization. So we had all those calls. We also had the organizations they were getting referred to. We had Calgary census data and many other types of neighborhood data as well. Team 3 broadened it even further to the Alberta perspective, and so we had additional data sets from the Alberta government on the grants that they provide across their various ministries and departments. We had data from Canada Revenue Agency on charity data, the T3010 data that gets contributed. So there we were looking, okay, what happens across Alberta? What happens when there's a fire in Fort McMurray or a flood in Calgary around dollars as well as around impact and activity. And then we had kind of 2 specialized teams. So Team 4 was looking at what's called like unstructured data. So doing things like text analytics and natural language processing. So any type of data that could be a survey that a organization ran or social media, for example. There's amazing technology today to do analysis of that, and so that's called text analytics. So we had a team looking at that. And then finally, the 5th team were specialists on putting data on a map, so what's called Geospatial Analysis. And so there's lots of data. We had organizations with postal codes and addresses. We had some of these 211 calls had partial postal codes, so we can put those on a map. So there's some very, very powerful mapping analysis done as well. So that gives you a sense of all the activity. We had about 80 people coming out on the Friday night, and they worked all through Saturday with the the Calgary Foundation was with us throughout this whole thing as well. And then Sunday morning, the teams made the presentations, which was incredibly exciting and incredibly insightful for the Calgary Foundation as well as the other organizations.
Yeah, I'm sure there were some really actionable takeaways they could have used from all that data diving.
Yeah. So we're kind of processing that now. It's kind of the old fire hose on that Sunday morning. There's just so much that was presented, but we are doing some documentation now and kind of summarizing the results, and those results will be available, through the foundation as well, the Calgary Foundation as well as to members of Data for Good and to the broader Calgary community as well.
I'm sure it's all going to be pretty invaluable too.
Yeah.
So you've been with the initiative now for, almost 3-4 years.
Yeah.
Has there been any specific projects that you can recall that you've been really proud of being a part of?
Yeah, I think I can't really single out any one specific project, but what I'm most kind of proud of, and I guess it's 2 things. Number one is the organizations that we've worked with, and just how they have really embraced this. And part of what Data for Good tries to to do is to build capacity to use data within the nonprofit social sector. So these organizations were just amazing in terms of fully embracing the initiative, dedicating their internal resources to this, but also being open to learning and interacting with our Data for Good volunteers. So that's been just amazing. The second part of that is kind of the other side of the coin, and what we're also trying to do is for the more technically oriented folks within the data community, is just how they've embraced the issues and the amazing work that these organizations are doing. And so we've learned just so much about whether it's the women's shelter or the distress calls that are coming in or the great organizations that are getting funding, right? So the flip side of Data for Good is it really gives it builds better citizens, right? We're much better off by knowing what's happening in our community and by knowing how we can do our small part to contribute through the data skills that we have within our organization.
Well, you guys are just doing amazing work. Is there any upcoming events or information you'd like our listeners to be aware of coming up?
Yeah, well, we'll be kind of going on all three cylinders in the future. So nothing specific there. What I would say though is just from the kind of national perspective, in that we're really trying to grow Data for Good across Canada, and we've had the privilege of working with Kevin Hayes in Regina and getting that brand new chapter going in Regina, which is incredibly exciting.
Yeah, we're actually going to get a chance to talk to Kevin tomorrow.
Yeah, and so now we're active in Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, and now Regina. So I would just put out to your audience that we're looking to expand in other cities, other places. So if they know of anybody in other cities across Canada that somebody that has a passion for data and that or wants to introduce us to some great nonprofit organizations in their city, really all it takes to get things going in a city is one person, right? And is to put the idea out there, and then that just coalesces a whole bunch of other people that step up. So I would put that invitation out to your audience.
Excellent. We'll make sure that all of your contact information regarding the website,
sure.
Make sure all of that information is up on our podcast website.
Yeah, for sure. And we do have a national website, dataforgood.ca, so that's a good place to go initially.
Excellent. We'll make sure that contact information's up there.
Yeah.
Well, I really want to thank you for your time there, Geoff. It's been super illuminating, and I think you guys are doing amazing work, and I want to thank you for being on our show.
Right. Thanks very much.
As Geoff says, all it takes in one city to get things going is one person. One such person is Kevin Hayes, a former member of the Calgary chapter. When Kevin recently moved to Saskatchewan, he wanted to continue what he'd worked so hard on in Calgary. So, he founded a chapter of Data for Good there in Regina. We're joined by phone with Kevin Hayes from the Queen City to talk about his work in founding the chapter and what they've been up to.
Hi, we're here with Kevin Hayes from the Regina chapter of Data for Good. How are you doing today, Kevin?
I'm doing great. Duncan, how are you?
I'm doing really well. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. My name's Kevin Hayes. I'm the Director of Digital and Media Strategy at the Phoenix Group and also the organizer of the Data for Good Regina chapter.
Excellent. Can you provide a bit of brief background for your involvement with the initiative?
Yeah, this started when I lived in Calgary a couple of years ago. There's the Calgary chapter of Data for Good run by Geoff Zakaib, and I initially got involved with them in one of their initial projects, which was doing what's called a datathon, which is a 48-hour-ish time frame where a bunch of people get together and crunch the data from a nonprofit.
Yeah, we talked to Geoff about those. They looked really cool.
Yeah, and tons of fun. And so that's where I initially got involved with Data for Good. And then moving to Regina last year, I noticed that there could potentially be a need from the data people side to the nonprofit side of an organization like that here in Regina. So I threw it out there and had our first meetup last week on December 5th and got some people out to talk about data for good.
I was going to ask you about that. You had a meetup on the 5th. How did that go?
That went really well. So a meetup, for anybody who's not familiar with it, is a group of people that organize together through a website called meetup.com and organize about anything. In our case, it's about data for good. So we had about 30 people show up, which was more than the amount of people that registered, and we had data people and nonprofits and non-data people all show up and all take an interest in how they could participate in this group. So it was really promising, really encouraging. The weather was terrible, the roads were terrible, and I thought about 3 people were going to show up, but a lot more than that did show up.
Well, that's awesome. So when you started the chapter in Saskatchewan, what were you hoping to accomplish? I know it sounds kind of weird, but what's the end goal here?
Well, the end goal is really about helping 2 groups of people. One are organizations, nonprofits and charities who don't have the resources to understand what their data means to them and how they can use it to do their mission or fulfill their purpose more. So that's one group. The second group is the actual data people themselves and even the non-data people who have skills around data and analytics and want to give back to the community, want to use their skills to give back to the community. So the end goal is matching those people together and having something useful come out that is meaningful in a social cause way. And so far, it seems that those 2 groups of people are excited to meet each other.
Yeah, from what you told me about the meetup on the 5th, there's been a lot of interest. Are you still looking for volunteers?
Yeah, we are looking for volunteers, and we're looking for all types of people. And this is a group that's really about the community that it serves. And so when you talk about end goal, that I suppose is a piece, serving charities in Regina and in Saskatchewan is the end goal, but this really is going to be driven by what the community wants and what the community can handle and where the community wants to take this group. And so with that, we need obviously data people, we need obviously charities to serve, and then we also need a lot of people who are non-data people and to help with communications and setting up events and scouting locations and helping making sure this system runs smoothly. So we're looking for almost anybody and everybody who wants to be a part of this.
Yeah, I think that's important. A lot of people just think you're looking directly only for data scientists, but there's a lot of logistical things that need to get done, correct?
Yeah, that's right. And a lot goes into gathering people together and then organizing people and making sure that we all stay on track. So yeah, happy to have any participants in Regina show up and do some work.
Well, you got your first meetup under your belt. When do you guys hope to have your first project or datathon here in Saskatchewan?
So there are 3 different ways that Data for Good operates, or 3 different things that we can do. One of them is a datathon, so that is a 48-hour event where a bunch of people crunch a bunch of data for a nonprofit, and that usually could take up to 6 or 7 months to actually build by the time you get data and clean it and do all the things that make data preparable or ready for interpretation and analysis. So that we hope to have in 2018, one of those done in 2018. The second thing that Data for Good does is we work on smaller projects, and those smaller projects happen with organizations who maybe don't have mature enough data or data organized well enough or just don't have the proper data sets yet and don't require a big datathon. So we put those into projects, and those are run by what we call data ambassadors. So one of those projects we hope to get off the ground sometime in early 2018. I see a lot of opportunity for that.
Oh, excellent.
And the third thing that Data for Good does is we just have meetups, and where people get together and talk about data and we present on things. And those will happen monthly or every couple of months.
Excellent. And those meetups, once again, are like sort of educational events, correct?
Yeah, they can be educational. They can be a nonprofit coming in and talking about their data challenges. It could be we discuss a current project that we're working on.
Oh, that's really cool.
Get a bunch of eyes on it. So there's no prescription to what is going to work for Regina, and hence why we're really trying to make this thing move organically.
Well, I'm guessing that a lot of people are going to be wanting to get involved with this. If you're interested, how do we get involved with the Saskatchewan chapter of Data for Good?
So the best thing to do is to go to the meetup page and sign up and become a part of that meetup. So there's two ways you can find that. As I'm finding in Regina, meetup.com is not as well known as it is in other cities. So you can either go to meetup.com and search out Data for Good Regina, or just go to Google and type in Data for Good Regina, and our meetup page will come up. If you're on Twitter, please follow us at Data for Good YQR. And failing all of that, you can send me an old-fashioned email at khayes@thephoenixgroup.ca.
Excellent. And if you've got a really slow writing hand like I do, I'm going to make sure that everybody can get that information here on our podcast webpage.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, no, we just want to make sure that everybody can get a hold of you, right?
Yeah.
Well, I really want to thank you for taking the time out to speak with us about this. I think it's a really great initiative, and we're really glad to get a chance to talk about it.
Yeah, thanks, Duncan. I really appreciate Insightrix having us on and helping us spread the word.
Awesome. You have a great day.
All right, you too.
Volunteering in market research and data science is a growing trend here in Canada. Organizations doing great work with non-profits and not-for-profits like Data for Good are just the start. Ask your CEO, your boss, or if you don't work in the field yourself, just ask a member of the market research community. Most likely their firm is doing all it can to help out wherever possible. We'd like to thank all of our guests in this episode, Joy, Geoff, and Kevin, for taking the time out to talk with us about the work Data for Good has been doing here in Canada. If you want to get involved with Data for Good, either in a datathon, as a data ambassador, or just to volunteer your time on smaller projects, contact them. They need your help, and would be really glad to get it. You can contact them at dataforgood.ca. All of their contact information, including chapter information for Regina and Calgary, can be found on our podcast page. We really hope you can get involved. And of course, we'd also like to thank you for listening to this, our second episode. We'll be back in about 6 weeks with episode 3, The Stories of Market Research, the Insightrix podcast.